Today I'm going to talk about managing mosquitoes in stormwater management facilities. When I originally started putting this all together, we have a number of different studies over several years where we tried different products, different formulations, different techniques, sort of all over our jurisdiction, including all of our stormwater management areas. And what I found is that there were some really basic themes and things that we learned from all those studies. So instead of going through and doing all the studies individually, I'm going to kind of lump it all into sort of a big lessons learned type of thing. So I'll give you a brief introduction of the branch that I manage and where we are, what we're doing, and then kind of just a real quick crash course into stormwater management facilities. And then kind of how stormwater management and our mosquito management collide, and then go into some history, and then what those lessons that we learned, what they are, and then tips and tricks and things like that. And then kind of how we're going to go and handle this in the future as our program evolves and kind of as technology and different ideas evolve. So Prince William County Mosquito and Forest Pest Management, as the name implies, we don't just do mosquito control. We're tasked with doing gypsy moth, fall cankerworm, and other forest pests, surveillance, control, public outreach, education. Our main mission is to survey, reduce, and manage mosquitoes and forest pests. It's a much longer mission statement, but for the purposes of this, the short version will suffice. And just to get everybody on the same page as far as down the line here, when I start talking about numbers and what we're doing, to put it into perspective, we have 13 full-time employees, including myself. 7 of those folks are dedicated in the field. Through the summer months, probably 80% of their work is going to be on mosquito, but because we do those other forest pests, they might have other duties mixed in with it. And then every year we have 3 to 6 seasonal employees that mostly work on setting our traps, and they're not really involved in anything else. Our funding comes from a special service district levy, and what that means is on top of everyone's property tax, they pay an extra rate that comes directly to my program. So we're not a general fund type of scenario where money can be taken away or given in bad and good years, respectively. We almost always have a pretty stable, dedicated funding stream, which allows us to do some of the things that we're able to do. And then just for perspective, if you're not familiar with Prince William County, I hope everyone is familiar with the location of the nation's capital. So we're about 30 miles southwest of Washington, D.C., sort of outside of the Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax area, right around Quantico Marine Corps Base. It's about 336 square miles. That 470,000 residents is probably closer to 500,000 residents, and we do have around 131,000 households. So it's not a huge county in terms of population or in residents. We're probably right around the middle. It would be the second largest in Virginia, but certainly not as large as some jurisdictions will get. So what is a stormwater management facility? Everybody has seen them, and they're absolutely everywhere. But basically, they are facilities that gather, collect, store, and or treat stormwater or surface runoff. So most of these are mandated under the Clean Water Act, which we are all under for the Chesapeake Bay. Here in Virginia, we have 17 approved practices. 15 of those are what I'm calling open source, and they are just sort of general design specifications. And you're probably familiar with a lot of these. And they range everything from sort of a rooftop disconnection, which would be a rain gutter system that goes into a French drain, and then ranging all the way to what would be a wet pond, a retention pond type of scenario where it could be several acres of, which is essentially a lake. and then sort of everything in between. I'll kind of discuss specifically facilities of concern later. The two other practices, these are mostly proprietary designs that are lumped in as just general things, that they're typically smaller devices that are manufacturer specific that you can install. A lot of them are underground facilities, or they're things that one manufacturer is called Filterra. They're everywhere, where you would see a plant sort of coming up out of the ground where a drop inlet would be, things like that. They by design, they're of concern for mosquito control, because their sole purpose is to, at a minimum, collect rainwater. Now, what happens to that rainwater after it's collected varies greatly on the facility and the practices of the individual jurisdiction that's managing those. But just in the sheer nature of what it's there to do, it's of concern to us. Quick anatomy of it. This I just ripped right out of the Virginia Stormwater Manual. The top picture there would sort of be a bird's eye view down on what I guess you would consider a typical stormwater facility. Starting at the top, you would have the area where the water flows in. And then usually you'll have either, a gabion basket or some sort of riprap to slow the water down or disrupt flow to some degree. And then as it makes its way through the pond floor, it's spreading out, potentially forming into a pool of water, or there could be plantings in there. There could be designed wetlands. There's a number of different things. And then every facility will have a dam breast or an embankment through which a control structure and pipe control the flow of water that come out. And then you can sort of see that the bottom picture is sort of a side view of it. And it's that same sort of tiered and stepped thing. It's kind of important to note that basically anywhere where you see a flat surface, or you see structure such as riprap, or you see a designed pool, these are all places that, number one, water will naturally collect, and number two, you will have a natural point of failure, which is going to kind of be a theme of this as we continue down through. So stormwater and mosquito management, we're really only talking about a handful of them. And even as we look at this list of grass channels, bioretention, the different types of swales and ponds, they all still fit that same general anatomy, where there's an area that water flows in, there is an area where water collects, and there's an area where water flows out, with varying structures in between. We can generally treat all of these structures the same as we begin to look and inspect and eventually start to manage those larval mosquito populations. Of course, wet ponds and dry ponds are probably what most people would consider, sort of the quintessential stormwater management facility. You see big ponds with fountains, or you see, the big dry mowed basin that are alongside the road. And like I said, they're quite common. Everyone has definitely seen them. And there's just pictures of them that on the left there would be a retention pond. And as I mentioned, these can be fairly large. We have some that are a single facility could be 3 different pools that are 3 acres each. And then obviously they'll have fountains. Most of them will support fish populations. A lot of them are actually repurposed for recreational uses with HOAs. Generally, these are not issues for mosquito control, because we sort of have a natural aquatic ecosystem that eventually takes over. And the mosquitoes tend to not want to use them, or they don't have the survivability in there because the water is not as transient. The issues we see with these places are typically maintenance things. You can see that concrete structure there. Sometimes they build in a catch basin sort of type of scenario where you'll have 3, 6, 8 inches of water at the bottom of that holds there to capture sediment and debris and not flow out the principal spillway pipe. Also with the inlets, you have erosion issues and things like that. On the right is what would be sort of a typical detention pond or extended detention pond or dry pond, depending on the language that you use. A lot of times they will have concrete channels like you see on this one. That's to help to also manage and maintain the flow of water through it during low rain events, and also to have the water flow directly into that little control structure that's there to help kind of move that water along, and then obviously avoid erosion as well, which is a major problem with stormwater management facilities. This is a bird's eye view of a facility that we have in Prince William County that I guess I have a pretty strong history with. It's a facility I've been to many times for many different reasons. But here we can see this is sort of a real world picture of it. It kind of looks like a slice of pizza. So if you're looking along the top edge of that pizza, you'll see 3 different concrete structures. Those are all inflows. The one all the way to the left, this is kind of a unique picture because, you know, clearly there was a rain event and there's water in the pond. And you can see around that concrete channel that comes out of that pipe, there's quite a bit of water in there. And that is a point of failure where erosion has undermined the concrete channel and now water sits there. So even if all of that water that's in the main body there would drain out, you would still have water sitting there. Then of course, what would be sort of the crust of the pizza, that is the embankment. And you can see that little square control structure. That is where the principal spillway pipe flows, the water flows through the principal spillway pipe out of the pond. Like I said, this would be a pretty typical type of design. This is probably a medium-sized facility, maybe on the large side for a dry detention pond. But this is kind of pretty typically what we're looking at. Obviously not the volume of water, as it should be dry or dry within 72 hours. But it is a pretty typical shot of what we're looking at. So stormwater management in Prince William County, the county has 2,203 separate stormwater management facilities. These are basically all wet, dry ponds or bioretention facilities that they need to maintain and inspect per their municipal separate storm sewer system permit or MS4 permit. There's a lot more, but they just don't fall under the permit guidelines, and therefore we're not as concerned with them because they're either maintained privately or they're under a separate permit. Kind of that second bullet there, the mix of public and private inspection and maintenance. It's a really important piece because there is no one agency or one person that maintains stormwater management facilities, and maintenance of facilities is probably one of the most important pieces to it, especially when it pertains to mosquito control. Out of those 2,000 plus facilities, about 1,414 are in our mosquito management database. We take out things like underground ponds and permeable concrete and things like that aren't a concern for mosquito control. But it still ends up being quite a bit. And you can see that screenshot there. That's just from our stormwater layer. This would be a typical neighborhood. There's quite a few facilities throughout there, kind of intermingled with the houses. So these are places where water's gathering and breeding mosquitoes, and it's literally in people's backyards. And there's a notion out there that stormwater management facilities don't breed mosquitoes, or they're being maintained. Therefore, they're not as much of an issue as, say, a woodland pool or a roadside ditch, and that's just not really the case. And a lot of times they're in worse shape than most people realize at a glance. So we run an IPM-based mosquito management program. We are heavily focused on managing for larval mosquito populations through source reduction and larviciding. We really don't do much spraying. In fact, the last 2 years, we didn't do any truck-based adulticiding. We did a little bit with some twister backpacks, but we really haven't had the need. We really try to do things with larval management first. In total, we have 2,302 mosquito sites in our system. 61% of those are stormwater facilities that I referenced in the last one. So 39% of our sites that we know to breed mosquitoes are things like woodland pools or tire piles, other artificial containers, junkyards, things like that. We do have quite a few amount of woodland pools and old tire ruts and things like that. We prioritize all our sites based on their inspection and larviciding history, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And we inspect and larvicide as much as we can based on a 30-day rotation. It really is our goal to inspect a site, larvicide it if we find mosquito larvae, and then get back to it within a 30-day period and try to maintain that throughout the summer months. So here's kind of two graphs, and this is just our stormwater management facilities over the last 5 years. The reason I chose the last 5 years is because that's when our practices became sort of a little more standardized and the data becomes a little more comparable. So if you look at the last 5 years, we're typically just on stormwater management facilities, we're doing between 2,500 and 3,300 inspections pretty consistently. And that holds true for prior years as well. But what we started doing differently is we really started bolstering up our source reduction, and we changed our larviciding tactics. So the bottom graph there is the amount of larvicide applications that we are making at stormwater facilities. And I just threw a trend line in there just to kind of show what that looks like over 5 years, and it's pretty stable. It really doesn't seem to matter what you do or when you do it. You're pretty consistently always going to find water at stormwater facilities and mosquitoes in the water at stormwater management facilities kind of on a regular basis. And I'll kind of address that here on the next slide, and would just be a comparison of our stormwater sites or unstormwater sites. You need to pond 5 times to do 1 application, and that average is very stable. If you look at the lowest year we had was 22%, and the highest year we had was 26%. Or I'm sorry, it was the highest was 22, and the lowest was 19. So the average ending up at 20% is fairly consistent. On the non-SWM side, the lowest was 26%. With the highest being almost 50%. Kind of the difference between the two is that third bullet point there, the application to inspection ratio, it doesn't change throughout the season for stormwater ponds. You're just as likely to find water and mosquitoes in the water in, say, April or May as you are in September or October, whereas non-SWM sites tend to be a little more seasonal in what's going on with them. So a lot of times what happens is we base our priority of inspections on what we know the history to be, and non-SWM sites definitely have a higher priority earlier in the year and at the end of the year because of that. The other, that second bullet point there, the average application size, 180 square feet versus 333 square feet. Again, the size of non-stormwater sites is almost double for the average application size. A lot of times what we see in stormwater ponds is small points of failure that are requiring maintenance, but they haven't reached the threshold for maintenance that would be of a regulatory nature where the pond is failing. But it becomes an issue for us as mosquito control because that failure is causing water to stay there longer than it's supposed to. In those non-SWM sites, you can imagine a woodland pool. Once you get a certain amount of rain where the soil is saturated with water, it's going to fill up to that point, and that's what you have. The location of applications is dynamic in stormwater ponds. What I mean by dynamic locations is it's all based on where those points of failure are. So a lot of ponds, you'll start to see erosional issues at those inlet pipes where, as we saw in the picture that I showed of that facility, that dry detention facility, you're getting failure at certain points, but those points move around quite a bit, and it's really important to inspect the facility as a whole. Drive-by inspections don't really work for them because you could gaze over the fence and say, oh, look, it's dry, but until you actually go down and look and find either tire ruts, or you find where these erosional areas are, or where there's undermining of structures, you can't see the water. So it's really dynamic, and you almost have to know the facility pretty intimately to know, where is this starting to fail, because inevitably it will. Whereas in a non-SWM site, it's pretty straightforward. This woodland pool either has water or it doesn't have water. This roadside ditch has water, it doesn't have water. Or if you're dealing with a junkyard scenario, you can pretty much always assume it has water. Stormwater facilities are not species specific, and I mean mosquito species. We get everything out of them. And you'll see some of the pictures I'm about to show. We have a lot of garbage issues. So we do have some Asian tiger mosquito issues. This year now, we have pretty consistently collected Aedes aegypti throughout the county in small numbers, so that's going to be a concern going forward. We get a lot of Japonicus, and a lot of them are coming out of just refuse in stormwater ponds. But then we also see, stormwater ponds set back in the woods will push out a lot of woodland pool species, a lot of anopheles, and then as well, sort of the erosional issue, we end up with a lot of culex. And then again, over to the other side, non-stormwater ponds, usually you have a pretty good idea of what species is going to come out of them based on just what the general attributes are, because the location itself is so static. So again, I've been discussing points of failure, and I could show dozens and dozens of pictures like this, but the main things that happen are sedimentation, where if you look at the picture on the bottom right, there's a lot of leaf litter and soil, and under that, where you see that piece of metal sticking up, that's actually an old control structure, and it's just completely buried, and now it's holding water. Erosion, obviously the top right and bottom left pictures, where under that concrete inlet pipe that's coming into the pond, it's completely undermined, and you get a pock pool underneath there. And this is why the application areas are so small in stormwater ponds, because this sort of type of scenario pops up all the time, where you're coming in here and you're applying a very, very small amount of larvicide, but you get quite a few larvae packed into those little ponds, those little pools of water. And then trash, debris, structure failure, all of the above kind of fits what's happening in the picture in the top left corner. Under that big pile of logs and soccer balls and water bottles and whatever else is in there's actually a concrete control structure that's been completely buried. In this scenario, we're kind of looking at an entire rebuild of the pond, but what you can't see is off on the left there is a giant pool of water that has no way to make itself out of the pond. So after all that, I guess kind of getting to the points of what does work and what doesn't work in stormwater ponds. The first thing I'll say is, if you're treating stormwater ponds the same as you would any other site, I would kind of point you in the direction to look at them a little bit differently, just because of the nature of the fact that they are maintained, or in some cases not maintained. It changes the dynamics of what you're doing, and you really need to get out and start looking at what's going on there. The other thing is, with stormwater ponds, you can actually do some maintenance and source reduction to help to alleviate the problem. So, there's me in the top right corner. I get my boots muddy every once in a while. And I'm just there with a potato hook, and I'm clearing out. That is actually an old facility. That's an old control structure, but I'm just cleaning out the debris to get the water moving. And then the other thing is, all those studies that I referenced prior, and all the different formulations and everything. What we found is that larvicides that you can disperse over an area, a liquid or a granular formulation, the active ingredient really doesn't matter as much, but because of the way the water flows in and out of ponds so frequently, these type of one-time applications tend to work the best. We've seen a lot of failures with other types of formulations that are for more appropriate habitats, where the water is a little more static. We've actually been on a charge to increase our source reduction efforts. In 2016, source reduction was only 2% of our larval applications, and in 2020, this year, as we're wrapping up, This year, it's closer to 10%. It's actually just under 10%. So we've increased it 5 times over in 5 years, because if we're really running an integrated mosquito management program, our goal should be to reduce our pesticide use. And I can tell you it's hard to sort of display it, but typically if we do source reduction on a site, we may not have to apply pesticides that or do more source reduction on that water for 2 to 3 months, as opposed to just applying traditional larvicides. We have to be back there every 20 to 30 days to do so. So we're actually reducing our amount of pesticides, and we're actually more effectively controlling the mosquito population. Doesn't work, tablets, briquettes, the things in that category, the extended release formulations. Kind of like I said, the water just comes in too violently. If you've ever seen a video, they put the signs on stormwater management facilities that say, like, please do not enter, water rises rapidly. If you've ever seen a video of how quick it goes up, it's just taking those and pushing them out. So I kind of grabbed the 2 images below. I grabbed from a training that we used to give to our field staff on how to appropriately drop dunks in and around stormwater management facilities with, making sure that you're spreading them out properly and everything. And not long after we were doing that presentation, we did a study on it. And what we found is they either get completely washed out, or they get covered over by sediment, because the sheer nature of a stormwater management facility is to let water settle, capture that sediment, and they just get buried. Sometimes they get buried in as little as 10 days, depending on how quickly and the amount of rain that falls in that time frame. So it becomes an issue. You never really know if that's still working, and you could be going there dipping, finding mosquitoes, and you're not sure if that 150, 180 day briquette or extended release formula that you put down is working. These work way better in places like artificial containers and swimming pools, and we use a lot of them in those types of scenarios. They're just not appropriate for making those applications to the pond floor. So tips, tricks, and advice. Really, it's a great idea to have a relationship with your MS4 administrator. So I have the benefit of our MS4 administrator is actually my supervisor, because we're located within Public Works and they are tasked with being the administrator. I have a really close relationship with him, and we can kind of hash out where we can put good stormwater management practices into place that also benefit for our mosquito management strategy. I can definitely tell you that picture in the top right corner there, that's just a small puddle that happened, and you can see all those little black dots, I hope. Those are all mosquito larvae, and that puddle is probably only about 6 or 7 square feet. It's very small. There's a lot of larvae in there, and that is not something that would trigger a maintenance event on that stormwater pond. They're just, it's too small. It's not cost effective to do so, because they don't need to do it for their regulatory issues. But it's a big problem for us, because we have to send somebody there to constantly be taking a look at it and applying larvicide. Like I said before, I would definitely inspect the whole facility. Anywhere where there's structure or there is a designed area for the water to sit is one of those points of failure. And you can go out and inspect a facility, walk around the pond floor, week in, week out, and if you're not checking the pipes, you could be missing a lot of these smaller areas that account for pretty large boost to your mosquito population. Don't shy away from using hand tools. I always go back to an example. I was at a facility, and the low flow orifice for the principal spillway pipe was actually clogged with a plastic bag, and I just grabbed a stick and kind of poked that plastic bag and pulled it out of there. And I probably drained 3 acres of water in about 12 hours because it was able to do what it was supposed to do. But because that bag was kind of sucked onto there, it wasn't able to operate as it was supposed to be. So, in that scenario, I probably saved myself from applying, 20 or 30 pounds of larvicide because the facility was definitely breeding. And it was quick, easy, and, it looks good for everybody if we're not, doing that, and then we're not worrying about things like resistance and whatever else, depending on what product you're using. And the final point there is to keep track of your data. So that little snippet is a shot from our mosquito management database, and it's actually for the puddle that's in the top right. So you can see June, July, August, September, 3 out of 4, that puddle was wet. The area treated there was 6 square feet. Just having the metrics on individual facilities or a type of facility is just really important over time. Future projects and consideration, we did buy ourselves an A1 Super Duty to do some wide area larviciding. We know it works really well for controlling Aedes albopictus and artificial containers, but that shot on the right there is a shot of the stormwater management facilities in our test area, and a lot of them are very close to the road, close enough that we know we're landing droplets in there. So we're going to kind of take a look at, is this going to be sort of a fringe benefit of doing wide area larviciding, and are we going to get some control in those stormwater management facilities where our conventional methods may not even be necessary anymore? The second thing that we're going to consider is doing some better profile and prioritizing of facilities. Older facilities that use corrugated metal pipe and things like that tends to fail more often may end up being a higher priority. We're lucky that our MS4 administrator definitely keeps track of the types of materials and design that goes into each and every stormwater facility. So we're going to see if we can get a better idea of what those materials are, when it was built, what size of an area drains, because a half an inch of rain on a facility that only drains a half an acre is not that much, but a facility of similar size that drains, maybe 2 or 3 times that area, it's a lot more water. And we know that there's a correlation there, but we haven't been able to pick it apart yet. So we're definitely going to look into that. And with that, I am done, and I think I'm probably out of time.